My name's Monk Rowe. I'm very pleased to have Ken Poston with me this afternoon. Morning for you, I assume.
Yeah, I guess so. Pretty much late morning, I guess.
So I want to share sort of an image I just got hooking up cords and so forth to do the Zoom and plugging things in. I was thinking while I was doing that, how to succinctly introduce you. So I have something to try on. Sounds like this: Ken Poston Jazz Hub
Okay. There you go.
with many inputs and outputs.
There you go. I like that.
Um, it would be curious for me to be perhaps standing in the background if you were at a some kind of party and a person who didn't know you asked, "What do you do?" What would you say, in 30 seconds?
I'd probably just say that concert production, radio, teaching, run a jazz archive, and the things that come off of that, like writing and lecturing and things like that. So that would be the succinct version, I guess.
Do you have any idea when you were 18 or 19 that you would end up being a hub?
No, no, at that point, just getting out of high school, I chose a music scholarship to go to the University of Kansas. So I knew I wanted to do something related to music, but I wasn't exactly sure, even going into school, what it would be. And of course, the choices were music performance or music education. And I really didn't have any designs on being a professional trumpet player. So I went into the education program. But again, I really, coming out of school, it was almost a last minute decision to take the music scholarship. I also played baseball. And if you would have told me anytime up until about 3 or 4 months before I was out of high school that I would have done anything other than follow baseball, I would have laughed. I would have thought, I would have thought that was ridiculous. But something happened to where I decided that I really wanted to pursue the music side of things. And so I decided I went with the music scholarship at Kansas.
Was,
So
was
I
Jerry
wasn't sure,
Mulligan? I'm sorry, was Jerry Mulligan in your consciousness at that time?
maybe through Chet Baker, because when I really started to get interested in jazz, I would have probably been eighth or ninth grade. And I was trying to find records of trumpet players, even though I maybe didn't know who they were, to play along with or to try to play with. And so I'd come across Chet Baker, and Chet was actually one that I could somewhat play along with. Miles, a little bit. But then Dizzy Gillespie, no, I found a Dizzy Gillespie record that, well, couldn't do that.
How about
So
Maynard Ferguson, right? Oh, there's an easy one.
yeah, and I'm of the age to where Maynard was like the big star in the 70s, and I mean, so all the, everybody, all the trumpet players especially idolized Maynard Ferguson. And I loved it too, but I knew that I couldn't do that. And I didn't know if that was something I would ever be able to do. But I recognized the fact that I could only go so far with the Maynard things before I'd have to go down an octave or two.
I'm going to see if I can put this. I was going to save this for later, but it seems to me, in reading about jazz history and society, that at different periods, jazz has had a place in American society. If it was the jazz era and the music that went with it, of course, the swing era, the avant-garde period, civil rights, the jazz has had an impact on that part of society. You don't have to necessarily agree with me, but I wonder if you think jazz, what is the role of jazz in society in 2024?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I think, I mean, the thing to me right now, I mean, I think it's what I've noticed over the last few years is this great desire to kind of blur the lines of jazz and other musics. Um, I assume that's for commercial purposes. I never really thought too much about it, but the radio station, I see it all the time with CDs that we get and things like that. So I think jazz is at a point for the 2024 part of it. I think there's a certain perception. It may not be the same by everyone in society, but I think there's a certain perception of jazz and what jazz is and what it represents. And I think it's, we're in an age where it's celebrated at Kennedy Center and at the White House and at Lincoln Center and things like that, which, prior to the 1980s, that didn't really happen too much. So as jazz has become thought of as, and all the keywords and all the phrases everyone uses of America's classical music and this and that, I think it's made people aware to a certain degree that it's an important American creation and important to our society and important to our culture. The sad thing is I don't think it has educated people anymore so as to what it is or why. But I think that there's a perception of it as being, and I think you could say that probably about decade by decade, that the perception has changed or altered or enhanced as we get to this point. But yeah, it's tough because I know just from personal experience, at least for me, is that I think it's more difficult now as it's ever been to have successful events and to have successful projects related to the music that to draw an audience. In other words, I think unless something is subsidized, having it subsidized by a paying public is as difficult now as it's ever been, unless it's a festival or an event that uses the term jazz very loosely, but it's more of a music festival that has performers on it that'll draw a big crowd. And of course, as we know, we've seen more and more of that. And that's what I said in the beginning, this blurring of the lines kind of that it's okay, jazz has touched so many kinds of music that it's okay now for rock groups to headline jazz concerts or for, whatever the case may be. So I don't know if that's healthy or unhealthy, but it's just something that I have to deal with on a daily basis because the tendency, I mean, if you're not really passionate about it and if you're not really depending on what your reason for why you're doing what you're doing, it's easy, I think, to take the easier road of festival headliner or concert headliner or something that will guarantee. Now, people will argue that that's okay. People argue that that's okay. If it takes a certain headliner to subsidize the event so that everybody sees and hears everything else, then that's okay. I mean, I certainly think you can make a case where it's okay, but I think there's times it's not okay as well. So, and I think there's times that it's unnecessary. So I guess that's that's kind of an issue today
Yeah,
to me.
as a producer of events, is part of your task to go out and find some of those people and companies to subsidize these concerts.
It should be, but I've never really done it. Pretty much everything I've ever done is based on the audience attendance. There's a few exceptions to that, but not really anything where I had gone out and sought it out. I've had a couple occasions where a sponsor has come to me, and frankly, I've had some we've turned down that didn't, that what they wanted in return for sponsorship would have altered the event or the purpose of the event. So it's so no, that's not something I've done. It's something that if I was smarter, I would have done maybe, but never done it. I've always worked from a standpoint of trying to understand the audience or whatever segment of the audience that I'm going to promote something to, and find a way to get them excited about going. It's not that hard to find the audience. I mean, they're not that, we know where they are, but you've got to convince them in this day and age to get in the car and go somewhere. And, that's harder today than it's ever been. That was the other thing I was going to say from your earlier question, is with the advent of Zoom, the advent of streaming, the advent of all these things, everything's much harder for me anyway today. Radio, for example, we're still a terrestrial radio station, but people can stream and listen to anything they want to listen to at any given time. They can create their own radio stations. They can create their own playlists. They can, so to me, we've had to alter our approach with terrestrial radio, at least we have, to make sure that we create something that gives people a reason to listen to us as opposed to just listening to whoever they want to hear at any given time. And it's kind of the same with the events, because of new technologies. I think COVID played a role in teaching people how to use Zoom and streaming, and teach people how to attend an event without actually going there, things like that.
How do
And
I,
I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily,
right?
but it's different. So that to me is, all those things combined are what's different now and more challenging, at least more challenging for me.
That phrase is going to stick in my head. How to attend to an event without really going.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
And you can
how
do
do
that.
you take the pulse of the Southern California area to try to program the acts and the artists that will bring those people? Is it partly your radio work or word of mouth?
It depends what it is and what we're doing, because kind of the sequence of events for me was at what used to be KLON radio in Long Beach, which now is KJazz. So I was there for 13 or 14 years producing concerts and festivals and on the air as well. Then the Los Angeles Jazz Institute, which I still operate the Jazz Institute. But then almost 10 years ago now, I became the general manager at KSDS in San Diego, because I truly wanted to see jazz radio continue. And I decided I could continue to do all the other things I did as well as run the radio station. So all of those things, as far as they have different approaches, like for the radio station, when we do events, there's usually a concept or a reason why we're doing it. Because I've never felt as a radio station that our role is to compete with other area promoters who are struggling to, whether it's clubs or festivals or whatever. So I've always felt with the radio station aspect that what we do there has to be something very unique, very special, or has to have some unique aspect of it. That's why I've rarely, I say rarely, but I guess in percentage wise, I'm usually not in a position where I'm just hiring a set group to play for an occasion. I'm usually having to create something, to put something together, whether it be, a reunion of sorts, or whether it be putting a band together to play someone's arrangements, or whatever the case may be. That's always been kind of more of the direction, especially with radio, because again, there's our job with radio is to promote what the local promoters are doing and to try to help them, not to compete against them. So we do things, again, for a purpose. Sometimes the purpose is as a fundraiser for the radio station. Sometimes it's to showcase something or an artist, or maybe to celebrate a historical occasion, or to celebrate something, a new release, or whatever the case may be. Jazz Institute's a little bit different in that the archive is the centerpiece of the Jazz Institute. And this large archive that we've built over the years that has many artist collections, most of which are Southern California related. I knew from working with all the artists, and when we started this, that the idea was that a lot of them complained about donating their materials to a place where they're going to be locked away and never heard from again. And I knew that ideally what Pete Rugolo and Shorty Rogers and Bud Shank and so guys like that, what they wanted really, even if they wouldn't come right out and say it, was that their legacy would continue after they were gone. So we decided with the Jazz Institute, where the archive would be the centerpiece, and then the events and the festivals and things that we did would all utilize materials in the archive to be able to showcase and maintain those legacies. And for the first several years when we were doing it, many of the musicians were still alive. Now, that's not the case now. We're just about out of a lot of the musicians of the eras that these collections represent. But we've been able to utilize the music by doing concerts of their music. We've been able to utilize the recordings by doing a series of CD reissues of rare materials, things like that. Now I can incorporate, obviously I marry the two together, so I can incorporate some of those things now into the radio element as well. But then also all those events always were multi-day, and I should say, not was, panel discussions, film showings utilizing the films, presentations that utilize photographs and memorabilia and audio and so on. So that's been our focus with the Jazz Institute, is to really utilize these materials and keep them a living, breathing thing and not just lock them away. Because the amount of researchers, and you get a fair amount of serious researchers that are doing things, and that's great. But still, to me, to keep those things alive, and then they become natural fundraisers for the Institute that way, because theoretically you're raising money from doing the events. So the radio purposes are related but a little bit different. Than the Institute archive purposes are a little bit different, but in approach. But they each have their own reasons as to why we do things. So the radio things become kind of natural from that in putting these documentary type programs together. I'd go interview the artists, find the music that was needed, and so on and so forth. But what I discovered when I was doing these radio shows and the events as well is Shorty and all the different guys like Rugolo and all, they had all those things they'd done through the years, but they were in garages, attics, buried some underneath things. And I realized there needed to be somewhere that gathered this stuff, because what I would end up doing, like when we would do a concert that had something to do with Rugolo, I'd be in his garage for 2 or 3 days, finding all these original scores and finding all. Then I would see like all of Rugolo's original handwritten scores and acetates of unknown concerts and sessions. And I started to get really excited about all of that, because it really augmented the things that we were doing, and it enabled us to be able to do the events and present all these things. And this was, because at the time we're talking about, and jazz lines did not exist. I mean, there wasn't somewhere that if you wanted to do a concert of, you know, Ernie Wilkins music, there was not a place you could go and rent those or buy those. I mean, you had to get a hold of Ernie Wilkins and hope that he still had them. And that was the case for all of the things on the West Coast. I mean, all those things you had to find. And so I did, I was able to uncover these things. And then it just naturally led to the idea that, well, there needs to be a repository on the West Coast for these musicians to leave their materials. And I just kind of decided that that would be something that I would like to do. So it crossed over with the last year or two of when I was at KLON. And then I dove into that full time for the next several years. And it was a good process, because I was able to really work on finding all these things, gathering the materials, making arrangements with the musicians to archive the things and digitize things, and really, really work on it like on a full-time basis. And then utilize the events. We would do 2 big events a year and then smaller ones in between. And those events would subsidize the whole thing. So up until we really started to lose a lot of the the original musicians, if you will. I say original, meaning people that were doing the music of, or at least people related to who were doing the music of. Um, it started to change after that. It became more difficult because people would get very excited over coming to see an alumni band playing. It all started with this big Stan Kenton event. I didn't even attend for that. I never intended for that to be the case. But when I first moved to Los Angeles to take the job at the radio station, I got one of the union directories, the published Local 47 union directories, and I started going through it just to see who was around. And I couldn't believe that so many of they still lived in the area. And the one thread that I noticed was like all the Kenton alumni going back to the first band were around. And it dawned on me that you could like really put together an alumni band of all these musicians, have Pete Rugolo, Lenny Niehaus, Shorty Rogers, Marty Page, Hank Levy, all the writers were still, Bill Russo, Bill Holman, everybody was still alive. And you could actually have them conduct this alumni band doing this. So we put together a 4-day event for the radio station, and it was huge. With this huge attendance beyond what anybody expected. It made a great deal of money for the radio station at the time. And it established that idea, and it established an audience. So through the years, as we continued to do these events, and this kind of goes back to your original question on this, we were able to continue to build a mailing list of people who came to these events. So over the years, as this list grew and grew, we had people that we knew wanted to attend these multi-day events. And we had people that came to the local events, and people who, and we had a lot of people who would fly in even for the local events because, again, they knew they were going to see something that they couldn't see otherwise. I mean, if you want to see this big Stan Kenton thing, you pretty much had to come. It's not going to travel, and it's not going to happen anywhere else. So, so we would put together things like that.
I'm wondering if in all your research that you've done about different people, especially on the West Coast, and you read what other people write about them, and then you get to know the actual person and you have conversations about them. Have you come across instances where what the actual person says refutes what has been written about them?
Many times, because as you know, the West Coast scene of the 50s, by the end of the 50s, there was a definite turning point within the critics and people writing about it to where that music was very much dismissed. And artists associated with that music got a lot of negative press as well. And so then I would, as doing the research, and you would read things like you said, you would read these interviews and things about certain artists that it just didn't, when I would meet them and get to know them, it didn't add up at all. Even Jerry Mulligan, Jerry, had this, Jerry's reputation, as you know, was temperamental and this and that and the other. And he was never like that with me at all. Now, to be honest, I saw that side, but not like people had described it. But Shorty Rogers, sweetest guy in the world, very easygoing. Marty Page, very difficult taskmaster. But you would read about the things people had written, and a lot of times it just didn't match up with the person that I had gotten to know. And I would get, over the years, I would get to know many of those guys on a pretty close level. Because the type of events and the type of things that I was doing kind of required working closely with them on the music, things like that. And then once you can kind of, one of the things that I'm proud of is that I had stayed in, I was in music at KU long enough, probably about 4 semesters. I don't remember when I switched over to radio, TV, film, but in the music education side of things, they sent us out as freshmen to student teach. And I got sent to a 6th grade string class, of course, violins and violas. But, I had the basic class and you have to, and I realized this isn't what I want to do at all. I mean, I respect it and I know it's necessary. And I was a student. I mean, but I didn't see myself doing that. So luckily they sent you out early enough that you could kind of see if that's what you wanted or not. So I had, I had been listening for years to KANU, which was the jazz at night, at least NPR station out of Lawrence, but at night was jazz, and on weekends. And the well-known authority on jazz in the Midwest was Dick Wright, and Dick taught the jazz history classes at KU. And I took that first jazz history class, and everything became clear for me because I'd read all the books I could find up to that point in the library at high school. And, but when I took that class, I knew a lot of the names but it all came together. I understood then when I took that class how everything fit together, which I didn't know before. I mean, I knew these different people, but I didn't know exactly where they fit within the overall scheme of things, at least not on that level. So when I took that class, it opened up everything. And I decided at that point to switch to radio, TV, film. So I switched majors, started studying, and I went up to Dick one day after class and I said, I was so shy, and I'm still shy actually. I have to not be in certain circumstances, but it took a lot for me to go up to him. And I said, I really want to do what you do. I don't know how to do it, but I'd like to play jazz on the radio and I'd like to teach jazz history because that's what I really love. And so I figured dozens of kids had probably gone up to him and said that. But of course, no one else had ever said that. He'd been teaching for years. So he kind of took me under his wing, and I got to work in the jazz research library there on campus. He had donated 10, 20,000 records at a time when none of those things were available. We're talking about early 80s now. I had access all of a sudden to everything I'd ever dreamed of being able to hear. Not only could I listen to it, I could make cassette copies of anything I wanted, and I had full access to everything. And it changed everything. And I really delved into the idea of radio, and I really wanted to do the teaching. So for the next 2 years, I I immersed myself into that. I even went to summer school so that I could work in the library during the summer because I mean, I just couldn't wait to get in there and catalog these things and listen to everything. And my education was quadrupled. But I was a radio, TV, film major. So I got on the student station and became the jazz program director for a couple of years and was able to start to actually be on the radio and kind of learn how to do that. And of course, Dick helped me and so on.
You were
So
a
I
kid
had
in
that.
multiple candy shops.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was so lucky, but it was frustrating because I would just dive into the downbeats and metronomes that they had in the library, and I would see reviews of records that I could only dream of ever actually hearing. And I would see things written about it. And then all of a sudden, when I'm able to go into this work in this library, everything's there. And everything that I'd ever read about or wanted to hear, there it is. And so it was an amazing thing. And I continued to play. I played all the way through school. Even though I switched majors, I still continued to play in the jazz bands and the concert bands and all those things. But I never loved playing like you have to love playing. And I learned that it had always come pretty easy to me. And I was always really good all through school. I was always able to be in all the state bands and the whole thing. And I didn't have to put that much effort into it. I never practiced like you were supposed to. My practice was playing along with records and just kind of doing what I wanted to do. But I know I get to college and everybody's as good as I am, and a whole bunch of people are way better. And I'm very competitive. So that wasn't something that stopped me. But I noticed that people really serious lived in the practice rooms. I didn't want to practice like that. I don't want to practice at all. I didn't enjoy that. I enjoyed playing in front of people. I didn't enjoy that part of it. And at the point that I came to realize that I didn't have the love for playing, that you might need. That's when I got more serious about this other avenue because I fell in love with the history and the things surrounding that, the listening to the things and the all that. So when I fell in love with that, it gave me a clearer path. And I started telling you this because of what you asked me, which now I don't remember, and I don't think I answered what you had asked me. But for whatever reason that made me think of all of that, it was somehow related to what you asked me,
I
but I
think it
can't
was indeed.
remember to what it was.
So I had the opportunity to interview Chico Hamilton and Buddy Collette, and I was struck by they spoke about the classic Chico Hamilton group and the fact that it had the cello and um, the guitar and had this different sound. And what they both said made it seem like that whole thing happened out of just circumstantial, like there wasn't enough room for a piano, that those kinds of things that are so logistical, and look what they lead to.
Yeah. I mean, that was, according to everybody, it was an accident. And that's according to all of them. Chico, Buddy, Jim Hall, Fred Katz. I mean, they all agreed that it all happened with Fred playing his, Fred was a very accomplished cellist. And I mean, he looked like a cellist. I mean, everything about Fred, and he was actually an anthropology professor. And
That
he
makes
looked
all
like an
kinds of
anthropology
sense.
professor, flowing hair and, so Fred was, I mean, he was a brilliant cello player and he would bring the cello to the Strollers Club in Long Beach. And at the breaks, he would play cello pieces. And then when the band got back on the bandstand, um, Fred couldn't get back to the piano because it was too crowded. And Chico said, just play the piano parts on the cello. I know that all sounds too good to be true. But they all agreed that that's what happened. So,
Well,
far as we know, that's what happened.
Chico said that the Jerry Mulligan quartet was almost the same thing. It was no stroke of genius. It started in my living room, and critics, historians, who everyone wants to make it something like a genius thing, and that's BS, he said.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of that. Chico and Jerry um, didn't get along too well after Chico left. And you would think that years later they would have let that go. Well, Jerry didn't let things go very well. But Chico left the group to go with Lena Horne when the group would really hit. And Jerry just really kind of never, Jerry would say that's all in the past, but then when you'd really talk to him off the record, he never, because to him, they'd created this very special thing. And Chico was a major part of that. And then when Chico left that group to go with Lena Horne, Jerry really never let it go too much. And that's what's funny too, because I had many events where I would have the two of them with their own groups on the same event, and they'd cross paths, but they really weren't too friendly. So it was really true. But then, I talked to Chico after Jerry died, and Chico was I think it was more on Jerry's side probably than Chico's, because Chico spoke at Jerry's memorial and, he spoke very highly of him. But there was that tension there. But Chico's correct in that it came together out of the necessity of the piano not being available when Jerry was offered. So I have no doubt. But the reality is, Jerry had been thinking in those terms, and this just made it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
The piano wasn't going to be available. Therefore, if you can work without the piano, you can have the job. And Jerry had been thinking along those terms. So then they started to, and then it just, it turned out to just be this once in a lifetime miraculous thing that came together that wouldn't have come together probably with any other pieces of that puzzle. I mean, it was the four people that came together that I think it just made it work because, Chet's role was a necessity. Bob Whitlock's role was a necessity, much more so than he gets credit for. And of course, Chico's as well.
All right, here's a little scenario. I'm a guest speaker at a symposium, a jazz symposium, and you're in the audience, and I come out, and one of the things I say is a jazz band is the embodiment of an unfettered democracy.
Well, I agree. I agree with that. I've heard Wynton say that many times, and I think it's um I mean, you're talking about just being a democratic process.
I am, but I'm also quoting from a review on your Jerry Mulligan book, and it said, for one, Mulligan took the managerial aspect of being a band leader seriously. His approach pours cold water on the romantic ideal that a jazz band is about unfettered democracy.
Okay. I can very much speak to that from personal experience and with many of these things. It truly is a case by case, band by band kind of a thing. There has to be a leader. Jerry was always very specific, and he's absolutely 1,000% right. There has to be a leader. So it's a democratic process when they are actually playing together, because then that role isn't required. I mean, then it's a process where they're creating music together, and everyone has a role that they can take liberties with as needed, so on and so forth. Unless it's a chart that you're playing necessarily, but even within that, there's interpretations. But even for what I do, what I learned very early on of having to put different bands together and create different things, you can't just usually put a band together and hope that and say, okay, we want you to we want you to do a tribute to Jazz at the Philharmonic, and we want you to do a Jazz at the Philharmonic type concert, because there will be a lot of standing around, and either one of two things will happen. Either one person that's a Jerry Mulligan type will just step forward and start to take the reins and say, okay, well, I think we should start with I Got Rhythm. And, or there will be a lot of standing around of not knowing what to do, depending on who the participants are. So I had to learn through the years, sometimes the hard way, that sometimes that had to be me. And that was hard for me to do because I was so much younger than the other people, and I had so much respect for those guys that I never saw myself of being someone who should be telling those guys what to do. But then you learn as you go that in certain cases, you're ultimately responsible for it, and you've got to make sure that what you want to have happens. So you either appoint a leader that's somebody who will do it, or you have to at least assume some of that role yourself. I would always obviously try to appoint a leader, but sometimes you would have to step in and do that. So, yes, Jerry was not a guy. Jerry was very, very much a leader. And I think that's one of his attributes, is the fact that Jerry had a vision, and Jerry knew what he wanted, and he knew how to get it, and he had no problem being the leader. And that's the thing, Jerry would say and it's in the book, you can't be a democracy. Well, what he's talking about is that type of scenario. Now, when Jerry would walk out unannounced at the Newport Jazz Festival to just participate in one of the jam sessions that he loved to do, that might have been him and Coleman Hawkins and Ben Webster and whoever, then it's more of what we're talking about, of the democratic process of those guys are playing together, and nobody is saying you only take two courses. I mean, there's more of a given, there's more of that process. So I think there's two sides to it, and it depends on the circumstances and what you're doing. But I noticed that even from having to a lot of things I've done, there has to be rehearsals, obviously, if you're doing big band concerts where you're reading things, has to be rehearsals to some degree. And I would always use, if I could, because it was more appealing to me personally, but it was also more of a selling point to the audience. Like, for example, if you're doing a Stan Kenton alumni event playing Pete Rugelow's music, and Pete Rugelow's the guy conducting the band, that's a big deal. But now Pete was not very comfortable in that role. Pete was very shy. Pete wasn't loud. He wasn't demanding. Pete would conduct, but he just kind of expected everybody would do their job and he wouldn't have to discipline anybody or this, that, or the other. Shorty was somewhat like that in that Shorty was not allowed. Um, but usually those guys had so much respect from the musicians that they would really, really buckle down when they were doing the rehearsals to show the respect. Sometimes not. Sometimes you would run into problems. But a guy like Jerry, that was never a problem. A guy like Marty Page was never a problem because they're going to get up there, and Jerry didn't care who it was. When we did those rebirth of the cool things, we did a rehearsal before one of the concerts. That would have been in L.A. at A&M. Herb Alpert would let us use A&M sometimes when we needed to do rehearsals for something we didn't want a bunch of people just kind of showing up and keeping us from getting things done. And it had Lee Konitz and Art Farmer and Brookmeyer. Was Brookmeyer in there? I think Brookmeyer was probably, it was either Brookmeyer or Rob McConnell. And, it was this all-star 10-10. It didn't matter that it was Lee Konitz. It might have been somebody we've never heard of. It didn't matter that it was Art Farmer. Jerry was, if Lee did something Jerry wanted different, he would tell him. If Art Farmer did something Jerry wanted done differently, he would tell him. So he was a great leader from that standpoint. And at certain occasions, it makes my job 1,000 times easier. But I know, again, the statement is very accurate from that standpoint. But also, again, I think when we're talking about the democratic approach, meaning that there's a certain amount of freedom within a jazz ensemble that you don't get otherwise.
Yeah.
And those freedoms and how, because again, with Jerry and Chet and Jerry in the rhythm section from the original quartet, musical decisions as they were playing was made by them listening to each other and playing off of each other. I mean, those things weren't, even the beginning, even the endings of things that sounded preconceived weren't. These were guys who were very much aligned musically that were listening and playing off of each other. And of course, in a small group setting, of course, to me, that's the most enjoyable thing, when the musicians are truly having a musical conversation among themselves. And when the piano player plays a certain harmony to something, the trumpet player, the sax hears it and goes that direction, and so on and so forth. That's the type of things when I'm listening to things that I love to hear, is when you really hear that interaction. So Count Basie was coming to Kansas City, and because we had played all those Sammy Nestico charts in the high school jazz band, I knew who Count Basie, I'd read about Count Basie and the connection to Kansas City, that I thought for the school newspaper, I was going to write a big history of Kansas City jazz, and this would be great if I could interview Count Basie. Then that could be a part of my Kansas City jazz history, and it'd be really great in high school to be able to do that. So our principal knew somebody and was able to get it set up for me to interview Count Basie backstage at the Uptown Theater. That would have been 1978 or 1979, somewhere in there. And of course, I was scared to death, and I made my questions up. I had my 5 or 6 questions, and I knew I only had about 10 minutes with him or whatever it was. So I get there, and they've got all the journalists, who everybody but me was like a real journalist, and I'm sitting there, I got my suit on, and I got my little tape recorder and the microphone, and I'm terrified that it's not going to work or whatever case may be. And but there's, I don't know, 6 or 7 other journalists there that are all set up to interview him. So they're not there yet, but I'll never forget, the stage door swings open and the Basie band starts coming in, and I'm sitting right there. And all of a sudden, Freddie Green walks in. And even though, I'd done my homework enough, I knew who all these guys were. And here's Freddie Green. And all of a sudden, this reality comes over me about, oh my God, that's Freddie Green. I have to interview Count, I'm thinking, I can't do this. I don't know. And so I'm starting to get really scared once I saw Freddie Green. And then Basie comes in. And Basie comes in, everybody's clapping. He's got the captain's hat and the cigar going. And they put him in this room. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I can pull myself together, look at my questions. There's all these other journalists, so give me some time to get together. Of course, I'm the first one called. Immediately they call me. So I go in and I asked my first question, which was these were all very pedestrian questions. You know, what was the Kansas City jazz scene like when you were something like that? First thing out of Basie's mouth, which I heard him do many other times, but I didn't know this at the time, but I heard him do this in many other interviews. Oh, well, see, I'm writing a book, I'm writing my biography, and I can't talk about those things that are going to be in the book. So, you got any more questions? And of course, you can imagine, like, 16, 17-year-old kid that has, and I don't know what to do. So I kind of rephrased the question. I guess I don't know what I said, but I kind of rephrased it. And the Basie goes, "Oh, well, that's kind of the same question." And I go, "Oh, well, um, what about Lester Young?" Like, Lester Young. And Lester Young was a stylist. That's all he says, right? Oh, so I'm running out of my questions. I'm not sure what to do. So finally, I just start winging it because I see this isn't going to work. And it scared me when he wouldn't answer the question. So I just said, well, I said, thanks. I said, I just want to tell you, I'm in my high school band and we don't play anything. We play all the Sammy Nestico charts. The minute I said that, his whole demeanor changed. And he was so thrilled, that you guys, oh, you play my music. I'm like, yeah, we play Wind Machine, this and this and this. He's like, oh, he goes, man, he goes, I would sure like to hear you guys. I said, well, he said, you should come over to my school, and he says, I will. Next time I'm in town, you get a hold of me and I'll come over and hear you guys. And it never happened, but I was able to take the tape back and play it for everybody. And everybody's like, oh my God. So then after that, he started answering my questions. So I ended up getting some stuff from him because all of a sudden, and that taught me kind of an interesting thing too, is that the way that the musicians view you makes all the difference in the world. If you gain credibility with them, which often you have to do, I think what's helped me through the years is having the music background has helped me and in some ways separated me from some other people who do what I do, certainly not everybody, but I'm able to speak that language. And also, then in doing the interviews, I speak a language where I can ask certain questions and I realized, and I don't know if I realized it right at that moment or not, but gaining the respect of the musicians and gaining credibility opens many avenues for you with the musicians that you might not get if they just kind of write you off as, you know, somebody who doesn't know or hasn't done their homework or really did. So, but that's the Basie story. I'll real quickly, you could, I'll real quickly tell you a fast Jay McShann funny thing from when I was in Kansas City. Jay and I went to lunch about once a week when I was working at the Kansas City Jazz Commission. There were places Jay liked to go. I think there was food he wasn't supposed to be eating, but I'd pick him up and we'd go wherever he wanted to go. Gates and Sons, or Arthur Bryant's, or wherever it may be. There was Ruby's Soul Food not too far from where my office was. And we went to Ruby's Soul Food. And we're sitting having lunch, and this woman, younger woman, comes over to Jay and she says, I know you. My mom has all your records. I know you. You're famous. And Jay, Jay. Jay was real humble, and Jay's like, oh well, He's like, yeah, yeah, I know who you are. My mom has all your records. I grew up listening to you. And Jay's like, oh, she goes, you're Bobby Blue Bland. And so Jay starts trying to convince her that he's not, and I'm just sitting there cracking up. And Jay's like, no, no, my name's Jay. And she's like, no, I know who you are. You're Bobby Bland. He goes, no. He goes, my name's Hootie. I'm Hootie. She goes, no, I know who you are. You're Bobby Blue Bland. My mom has all your right. This goes on for a while. I'm just cracking up. Jay keeps telling her he's Jay McShann, and she keeps insisting he's Bobby Bland. So then she whips it. She's, I got to get your autograph from my mom. And she whips something out of her purse, sticks it in front of Jay. So I'm watching Jay to see what he's going to do. Sure enough, he signs it Bobby Blue Bland, gives it back to her. And
Oh. That's great. Thank you
Yeah.
for that. What
Yeah.
is there any racial issues these days in booking concerts and diversity that you take into account with the productions that you manage?
Yes. Um, I make sure, and I always have, even years ago, before it was maybe as necessary, even as it is today, but I'm always very conscious of those things. And I try to take into account um, how what we're doing is going to be perceived. And so if we're doing some kind of a historical event that doesn't, maybe that doesn't have the diversity for natural reasons or for reasons that, for whatever reason that it can't, I'm always aware enough of it to be able to discuss it or, explain it or put it in the right perspective. But in this day and age, especially at the radio station, um, we're on a college campus, of course, and as you know, um, that's a very, very um, important item right now. Diversity is something that everyone is concerned about on every level at the college. And so everyone who works there and everyone who's in certain positions, even with us at the radio station, are expected, I'm sure. I mean, nobody comes out really and says it that way, but I know we're expected to approach what we do with with all things considered. Now, that doesn't mean that you can always be all inclusive, but it means that when you can, you should be, and you should make attempts, maybe. And what we do is we make attempts to design certain things that open the door to specifically have that be a point of what we're doing, is to do things that represent a diversity, whether it's a racial diversity or or other, or other.
Yeah, I
And
know
so,
what you mean. I do
so
a,
we've been real careful with that.
yeah,
And I don't mean careful from the standpoint of, trying to get by with not, it's not that at all. It's that we just try to make sure that we're doing things, taking everything into consideration and doing things the right way.
right.
And I've always kind of wanted to do that. I've always tried to do things what I've, in my mind at least, is the right way. Whether, it was hard. I mean, obviously, and again, I keep going back to the Kenton thing, but that's just because that was kind of the one that established these things. If you're going to do a Stan Kenton reunion, you're going to be very short on African American musicians, and you're going to be very short on female musicians. Now, there are some, and we include them as far as female musicians. I mean, Mary Fettig's been in a number of the events, but, Mary Fettig, off the top of my head, is about the only one I can think of that was a female musician that actually played in the Stan Kenton Orchestra. Um, there are Black musicians who were in the Kenton Orchestra through the years, but not very many. And that's where you get a lot of the racial things being written about someone like a Stan Kenton and so on and so forth with that. But again, when we've done the Kenton things, we've tried to address that, not to hide from it, but to try to address it so that it's presented in a way, not presented necessarily because I don't pretend to be able to read anybody's minds as to why this happened or didn't happen, but here's how it happened. You know, here's here's historically what happened. And so if that may, if that,
It does
so
make sense. We
try
have
to think
an
of it in,
event here every year that I organize, and sometimes it's much like a jazz party where I call one person and I say, bring a band, bring whoever you would like. What I don't say or have a hard time saying is it would be a plus if it was a diverse quintet And I find that hard to say.
It's hard because you can't, it's hard to tell the musicians, to change whatever their makeup of their group is or whatever. But it's, yeah, but it's, I understand it and it's something important. I understand that it's important. But again, it's just one of those things that I don't think there's any right way or wrong way to approach it. I think it's just a case by case basis for us as to whatever we're doing, whatever we're focused on, and how we can best address things the right way and be inclusive when we can. And we do that a lot now. And again, I don't ever like doing things for the wrong reasons. I mean, I don't like being inclusive because you feel like you have to. I like to do it because there's a valid reason to do it.
Last question. In your programming music, it's your own show, and you get a CD in of someone who's hot and you don't like it. Do you play it?
I don't know. You talking about for the radio?
Yes.
Yeah. The way we handle it, and this is on me, because I'm the one that has said this is how we're going to handle it. Our music director gets, I can't even begin to tell you how many CDs we still get a day. I
Even
mean, we get,
CDs they get.
yes,
Yeah.
they haven't fully gone to sending files because the digital files still tend to get lost in the mix. But there's a whole, I started to use the word industry. That's probably not the right word, but there's a whole industry of radio promotion people that represent artists and labels that their job is to call the music directors and get them to make sure their artists are played and report the number of spins that's getting each week so that it shows up in the jazz top 40 is, those type of things. And there's a lot of pressure from those kind of things because they're very good at it. They call you certain days that you set it up for them to call and they can convince you really need your help with this one to do this or that. I've told our music director and I've told our hosts as well, don't ever play anything that you don't like or that you don't think is good. I don't care what it is. We do a pretty good job now of our music director doesn't put anything into the library or doesn't put tracks in that we don't feel should be there. So then we're on a system where everything's digitized. So they have access to the CDs, but most of our on-air hosts, they're pulling stuff up and picking it out and what our music director is giving them are approved of, there shouldn't be anything in there that we're going to ever be listening to the radio and think, oh, how'd that get played? It happens from time to time, obviously. But I've told our people, and I believe strongly in it, don't let outside sources dictate what we play. That, send us the things if it fits our format and if we like, if we think that it fits and we want to play it, we'll play it. And if not, no amount of calling and asking, for favors and things is going to work. And, that works to a degree, but yeah, I mean, I don't believe. Now, are there exceptions to that? To me, no. But I think you treat local artists, you have a little bit more leeway with local artists, maybe, just because, again, you want to support the local jazz scene.
Well, thanks for your time, and it's been fascinating talking to you, and I hope we cross paths sometime in the future.
That would be great. I would love it. And thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. And, enjoyed the good questions.